What if I told you the secret to feeling free, light, and even rich doesn't begin with achieving more, but with letting go? Sounds strange, right? We're told that the more we plan, organize, and control, the better life becomes. But deep in Buddhist wisdom lies a paradox. The more you release, the more life opens. And in this episode, we're not just talking about abstract ideas. In fact, by the time you reach part 5, something may shift. Your body will begin to soften. Your mind will loosen its grip. And you may discover that what you've been chasing, freedom, peace, even abundance, was always waiting for you in the art of surrender. So stay with us through this quiet, powerful unfolding. And if you find something meaningful along the way, consider subscribing, not just to support this channel, but to help spread these teachings to more hearts that need them. Every click, every share, keeps this light growing. And maybe, just maybe, it's how the Dharma flows through you too. Part 1, the illusion of control. It began with a notebook, the kind with smooth cream-colored pages and a faux leather cover, kept neatly on the edge of Lynn's desk, just beside her morning tea. She called it her life plan. In it, she had scheduled everything. Career milestones by 35, the wedding by 32, children by 34, and somewhere in between, a spiritual retreat to find herself. And for a while, things almost went according to plan. Until they didn't. A single phone call unraveled her careful orchestration. Her mother had fallen ill. Her job was downsizing. The person she thought would stay, left. She stared at the notebook, stunned. Every line item she had once highlighted with confidence now felt like ink marks on water, dissolving before her eyes. Have you ever felt that way? Like life was a train you were confidently driving, only to realize you were never really holding the wheel? Buddha once said, "All conditioned things are impermanent, but we, in our humanness, crave permanence like a child clutches a balloon, terrified it'll slip. So we plan, we organize, we try to master the chaos of life with checklists, apps, alarms, spreadsheets, vision boards. But beneath that attempt to control is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of pain, fear of being left behind by a world that moves unpredictably. And yet, here's the quiet irony. The tighter we grip, the more we suffer. Like trying to hold water with clenched fists, the act of control is what drains our energy the most. Letting go doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we stop clinging. It means we step back and see that life, like a river, knows how to flow, with or without our frantic steering. There's a Zen koan that asks, when the winds blow and the branches shake, is it the wind that moves, or is it your heart? Sometimes what disturbs us isn't the event, but our refusal to let it be what it is. I remember a story from the early Sangha, when a disciple asked the Buddha how he stayed so calm amid the chaos of the world. The Buddha simply picked up a leaf and let it fall, then said nothing. That silence was the teaching. Lynn eventually closed her notebook, not out of defeat but freedom. She started walking without planning the path, letting each step teach her something new. Some days were still messy, but she stopped fighting the mess. She began to trust that perhaps life wasn't something to be controlled, but to be listened to be danced with, to be bowed to gently, like the monks bow to their food before eating. You and I, we may never fully escape the urge to control, but we can notice it. We can smile at it softly, and then, maybe just for today, let go, not of responsibility, but of the illusion that we were ever meant to control it all. Part 2, the roots of fear. It's easy to believe we try to control life out of ambition, but deeper than that, beneath the lists and plans and polished smiles, is fear, subtle, quiet, but persistent, like a thread woven through every anxious breath. A fear of the unknown, a fear of pain, a fear of not being enough. We don't control because we're power-hungry. We control because we're scared. There's a story in Buddhist folklore about a woman who tried everything to protect her only son. She carried amulets, visited temples, whispered mantras every night before sleep. She avoided travel, avoided strangers, even avoided joy because joy to her meant a risk of loss. But one day, while fetching water, her son slipped into the river, and she realized in a single breath that all her efforts, all her vigilance had changed nothing. Loss still came, because loss doesn't ask for permission. The Buddha, when told this story, gently replied, "To love deeply is to accept the wound that may come. Fear often wears the mask of love, a mother's worry, partner's possessiveness, a perfectionist's obsession. But real love, true, awakened love, flows without needing to possess. It holds gently, not tightly. It doesn't fear change. It honors it." I once sat in a retreat where the teacher said, "Notice where your fear lives in the body." For me, it was the chest, tight like a closed door. For others, it was the belly, the jaw, the shoulders. Fear lives in our bodies long before we speak it out loud. The Buddha didn't ask us to erase fear. He asked us to see it, to sit beside it, as we would sit beside an old friend who's tired of pretending to be brave. In mindfulness, we don't run from fear. We bow to it. We breathe with it. And in doing so, we gently ask, "What are you trying to protect?" Because every fear is trying to shield something soft within us. A dream, a memory, a wound we haven't fully met yet. And sometimes that wound just wants to be seen, not fixed, not analyzed, just seen, held, like the Buddha holding a crying child, not with words, but with stillness. When Lin reflected on her need for control, she realized it wasn't about outcomes. It was about a younger version of herself who had once felt unsafe, unheard. She wasn't controlling the future. She was trying to protect the child inside her. But the child didn't need more protection. She needed presence. So Lin stopped micromanaging her life. She started sitting with her fear, noticing how it would rise and fall like waves, how it softened when she simply whispered, "I'm here." This is the root of liberation, not the absence of fear, but the courage to meet it with a steady breath and an open heart. Part 3, letting life happen. There's something quietly terrifying about letting go. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff with no wings, no map, no guarantee. We've been taught to take control, to make things happen, to be the architect of our fate. But what if, sometimes, life doesn't want to be managed, it just wants to be met? There was an old Zen master who once told his students, "Don't push the river, it flows by itself." First they laughed, but over time those words became a mirror, because that's exactly what we do, isn't it? We try to push rivers. We try to schedule happiness. We try to predict love. We try to time our healing. But rivers don't rush. Seasons don't negotiate. And healing, real healing, comes in waves, not calendars. Lin discovered this not in meditation, but in a rainstorm. She had been forcing her career, chasing deadlines, rehearsing future conversations in her head like scenes in a movie, until one afternoon, her bus broke down in the middle of the city. The rain came, fast and warm. She had no umbrella, no backup plan, and something inside her finally gave up, not in despair, but in surrender. She stopped under a tree and just watched, the rain touching her skin like forgiveness, the sky weeping without shame, children dancing barefoot in the puddles. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Because in that messy, unscripted moment, she wasn't the director of her life. She was just a character, moving with the scene. Letting go of control isn't weakness, it's trust. It's saying to the universe, "I'll meet you where you are." Just trusting that maybe, just maybe, the current knows something we don't. In Buddhist practice, this is known as accepting the suchness of things. Not wishing for the rain to stop, not pretending the road is dry, but walking anyway, wet and awake. You see, the lotus doesn't wait for the mud to disappear. It grows because of it. There's a reason why some of the most powerful teachings happen not in temples, but in train stations, kitchens, hospitals, and broken buses. Because life is the real monastery. It spills beyond our mantras and malice. It doesn't follow our man-made order. It dances to a rhythm older than thought. So what if today, instead of fixing, forcing, or forecasting, you paused, you breathed, you let one thing, just one, happen on its own? A conversation, a meal, a moment. What if you stepped out of the planner and into the present? Because sometimes, life doesn't need your blueprint. It needs your presence. Part 4. Trusting the Dharma. Have you ever planted a seed, then dug it up the next day to see if it had started growing? Sounds silly, right? But we do that all the time with our dreams, with people we love, with the life we're trying to build. We sow the seeds, then immediately grow restless. We want proof. We want results. We want life to report back with updates. Yes, it's working. Keep going. But Dharma doesn't work like that. The Dharma teaches us a quieter kind of faith, not in outcomes, but in causes. Not in when will this flower bloom, but in have I watered it with care? There was a monk once who asked the Buddha, "Master, I meditate every day, yet I still suffer. Why do I not feel peace?" The Buddha replied, "If you plant a mango seed, will you demand fruit the next morning?" The monk was silent, and in that silence he understood. To walk the path is not to force blooming, but to trust in the blooming. Lynn learned this after losing a job she had given everything to. For weeks she questioned herself. Was I not good enough? Did I do something wrong? What now? But in the stillness of one early morning, sitting by her window with a cup of tea, she noticed a tiny plant rising from a crack in the pavement below. It had found light, somehow, through concrete, through odds, without anyone's permission. And she wept, not from sadness, but recognition. The Dharma is like that. It grows quietly beneath the surface. Sometimes we don't see it, but it's working through us, shaping us in silence. Faith in Buddhism isn't about believing something blindly. It's about testing the teachings in your own life and seeing slowly but surely that they hold. That when you let go of craving, suffering lessens. That when you practice compassion, connection deepens. That when you choose presence over projection, peace visits more often. It's not magic. It's cause and effect, like seeds and seasons. There's a Vietnamese proverb that says, "Gieo nhân nào, gặt quả nấy." Sow the seed, receive the fruit. But not all fruits come fast. Some are slow, some ripen in the shade, some take heartbreak to sweeten. So the question isn't, is it working? The question is, am I practicing with love? And maybe that's all the Dharma asks of us, to keep showing up with intention, with patience, with trust in the soil beneath our feet, even when we can't yet see the bloom, because healing doesn't happen by force. It happens by faith. Part 5. The body as a mirror. Before the mind understands, the body remembers. Before the lips admit, I'm overwhelmed. The shoulders tighten, the chest contracts, the stomach twists quietly in rebellion. The truth is, our body always speaks. The only question is, are we listening? Lynn had been meditating for months, but her back ached, her neck was stiff, and her breath stayed shallow. She blamed the chair, the weather, her posture, anything but the one thing that was truly speaking. Her tension wasn't physical. It was emotional, energetic, spiritual. She had tried to control so much of her life that her body had become a container of that control. A dam holding back a flood of unspoken fears, silent grief, and constant pressure. And then, during a walking meditation, a monk gently said to her, "Let your body walk you." First, it sounded strange, but as she slowed her steps, she realized something. Her feet had been clenching, as if afraid of the earth. So she paused and let her heels soften, her shoulders drop, her breath deepen, not forced, just allowed. And in that simple moment, her body became not an object to be fixed, but a friend to be heard. In Buddhist teachings, the body is not separate from the mind. They are two wings of the same bird. What we suppress mentally will find a home physically. That silent anxiety curls into the belly. That resentment you never voiced, it shows up as jaw tension. The urge to control every little thing stiffens the spine, hardens the breath, locks the hips. But the moment we bring awareness, soft, kind, non-judgmental awareness, to the body, the armor begins to melt, not all at once, but gently, like ice under morning light. The Buddha often taught through the body, not just thoughts or theories, but direct experience. He invited practitioners to notice how suffering feels, not as a concept, but as a sensation. That's why the breath is so central in practice. Not because it's spiritual, but because it's real. It's here, it's now, tells the truth. When we follow the breath with curiosity, we begin to uncover so much more. How it shortens when we feel shame, how it pauses when we're startled, how it deepens when we feel safe. And through this noticing, we begin to heal, not by controlling the body, but by befriending it. Lynn began practicing a simple phrase in her daily meditation.
Thở vào, tôi buông. Thở ra, tôi mỉm cười.
Inhale, I let go. Exhale, I smile. Not as a command, but as a permission slip. A permission to rest, to soften, to no longer carry everything alone. Because when we release control from the body, we also begin to release it from the heart. And in that release, there's space. Space for ease, space for grace, space for life to enter again, not through force, but through flow. Part 6. The power of surrender. Not all letting go is loss. Sometimes letting go is the beginning of love. Real love, not the kind that clutches, not the kind that needs constant reassurance, but the kind that says, I trust you, I trust this, even if I don't fully understand it. Lynn used to think love meant always being needed. She believed that if she didn't worry for someone, protect them, correct them, she was somehow failing them. So she tried to hold everything: her partner's pain, her child's future, her family's expectations. But the more she held, the more they pulled away. Not because they didn't love her, but because love cannot grow in a clenched hand. One day, she came across a teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh. You must love in such a way that the other person feels free. That stopped her. She looked at her relationships and asked herself, do they feel freer because of me or more constrained? And the truth stung. Control doesn't always look like shouting or demanding. Sometimes it looks like overhelping, like giving advice no one asked for, like checking in too often or holding silent expectations. Even in spiritual practice, we do this, trying to control our progress, forcing inner peace, comparing ourselves to others on the path. But surrender is different. It's not passive. It's not weak. It's the deepest form of trust. An open palm instead of a tight grip. The saying, I will show up fully, love deeply, give mindfully, and then let go of what happens next. It's the parent who lets their child choose their own dream, even if it's different from theirs. It's the lover who allows their partner room to breathe, knowing that true closeness comes from freedom, not pressure. There's a Zen story of a student who kept failing at concentration during meditation. Frustrated, he begged the master for a stronger technique. The master smiled and handed him a leaf. Hold this in your hand, he said. Not too tight, not too loose. That balance, not too tight, not too loose, is the secret of surrender. Lynn began practicing this in small ways, letting her son dress himself even if the colors clashed, not texting her partner 10 times when he was late, breathing through the urge to fix, to correct, to control. And something beautiful happened. People leaned in, smiles softened, love came back, not because she demanded it, but because she made space for it to return freely. The Dharma teaches that everything arises and passes away. Trying to trap the moment is like trying to capture wind in a jar. But when we let it pass through us, we feel it, truly. Surrender, then, is not about giving up. It's about giving in, to trust, to presence, to the understanding that love and life both bloom best when we no longer try to own them. Part 7. Flowing like water. The great Taoist master Lao Tzu once said, Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water. Yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. And the Buddha, too, often pointed to the river. He compared the mind to water. When agitated, we can't see clearly. But when still, truth reflects naturally. For Lin, this truth arrived slowly. She had spent years trying to become strong. Strong enough to handle stress. Strong enough to not cry. Strong enough to not need anyone. But all that effort made her brittle. One afternoon, after a long day, she sat by a lotus pond at the local temple. She watched the water curve gently around the stones, never resisting, never complaining. And yet, nothing could stop its path. Not the stone, not the mud, not the wind, simply flowed. And in that flow was power. She realized, maybe strength wasn't about resistance. Maybe it was about resilience. Like water, soft, but unstoppable. In Buddhism, there's a powerful word, adapting. Not conforming, not surrendering your values, but learning how to bend without breaking. To meet the moment as it is, not as you demand it to be. When we become like water, we learn to hold space for contradictions. You can care without clinging. You can speak without shouting. You can lead without forcing. You can suffer and still remain soft. One Zen monk used to greet challenges by bowing slightly and whispering, "Thank you for teaching me how to flow." Even when illness came, even when misunderstandings arose, even when nothing went as planned, he understood that the Dharma isn't rigid. It's alive. It moves, just like water. So Lin began practicing this in daily life. When her plans changed, she flowed. When someone misunderstood her, she didn't rush to defend. She breathed, observed, and responded from stillness, not reaction. She didn't become passive. She became present, like a river, choosing its way forward with grace, not force. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering. But he didn't say we couldn't move or act. He just showed us how to move like water, with awareness, with compassion, with deep listening. So here's a small practice. Next time something unexpected happens, pause. Ask yourself, what would water do here? Would it crash? Or would it curve? Would it argue with the rock? Or gently find its way around? You may find that softness is not your weakness, it's your secret strength. Because what flows survives, what bends endures, and what yields transforms. Part 8. The quiet joy of letting go. There's a certain kind of joy that doesn't shout. It doesn't jump or sparkle or try to convince anyone it's happy. It just sits quietly, like an old monk watching the sun set through the temple trees. Lin met that joy not in a moment of success, but in the absence of striving. One morning, she woke up early, before the city stirred. No plans, no messages, no alarms, just the soft sound of her own breath, and the birds somewhere beyond the window, greeting a new day without agenda. She sat up, stretched gently, and made tea. Each movement was slow, unforced, sacred in a way she had never noticed before. She didn't think about the future. She didn't replay the past. She just existed. And in that existence, there was joy. Not because everything was perfect, but because for once, she wasn't trying to perfect it. You see, this is what letting go begins to feel like. Not dramatic, not a grand act of defiance or a spiritual declaration, but something much more ordinary, and yet somehow more divine. A loosening in the chest, a softening of the gaze, a quiet moment where you realize, I don't have to carry it all. In Buddhism, we are reminded often, you can put the burden down. The past, it happened. The future, it's unfolding. But this breath, this moment, is enough. There's a story of an elder monk who, near the end of his life, was asked, "What is your greatest accomplishment?" He smiled and said, "I learned to let things be. That was it. Not enlightenment, not mastery, just the gentle art of allowing. Not interfering, not chasing, not resisting, just being." Lin began practicing this by doing less. not out of laziness, but out of wisdom. She chose one task a day to do fully, rather than 5 she rushed through. She listened to people without trying to fix them. She let her feelings rise and fall like clouds. She forgave herself for the days she wasn't graceful. And slowly, the heaviness she had carried for so long began to dissolve. Because when we let go not just of control but of the need to control, we make room for something softer to enter. Peace, ease, gratitude, not the kind you post online, but the kind you whisper quietly to your tea or to your pillow before sleep. So if today you find yourself tired of pushing, proving, protecting, maybe you don't need to try more. Maybe you just need to trust more, to sit, to breathe, to smile at the mess of it all. Because life, when left alone, often knows exactly how to bloom. Somewhere a leaf is falling, and not once does it ask where it will land. The river flows without needing permission. The wind changes without explanation. And maybe you, too, can begin to trust your unfolding. Letting go isn't loud. It's not a big moment. Sometimes it's a whisper, a breath, a pause in the heart that says, I no longer need to hold everything so tightly. If this episode offered you something gentle, something true, we invite you to subscribe, not out of habit, but out of purpose. Because every subscriber here isn't just a number. You're part of a circle of light, helping Buddhist wisdom reach those who are tired, searching, or silently hurting. You never know. Your one small action may be the Dharma finding its next home. So leave us a comment. What's one thing you're ready to stop controlling today? We'll meet you there, as always, gently, together.